Hi, how are you? My name is Jeff Schinella. I'm a product director at GitKraken. Today, I'm going to talk about optimizing review workflows with automations. We really think there's some useful tips and tricks that teams can use to help just speed up, make things safer, more efficient with automations around your pull request workflow. So with that, I'll get started. For those who are just not familiar with it, to set some context, a little bit of housekeeping. When I say pull request, if you're using GitLab, obviously that means merge request. It's any sort of change that your team might be making to your Git provider or hosting provider. Most of us are familiar with GitHub's flow. I'll be having some examples and referring to them as pull requests for this talk, but they all have similar review options and similar things as far as what you and your team need to do to get code merged into the sort of main branches of your repositories. The general idea, obviously, is that the faster that we can get our changes merged and in a safe manner, the faster we add value to our app, to our business, to the things we're working on. So during this talk, you'll see some screenshots of what we have planned for GitKraken automations to help illustrate some of the ideas behind it. As a sort of aside, I did use ChatGPT to generate the copyright-free versions of popular memes, and we'll be looking at some of those and probably being creeped out by a few of them. So with that, let's talk about our first review challenge that teams face. Typically, one of the challenges that can come up when deciding, who to assign a pull request is the idea of ownership, right, or expertise in a particular area of the code base. Who should review this PR? How many reviewers should be here? Are the people still around? All these questions can kind of arise with this type of, challenge as far as it goes. There are code ownership features available in a lot of the Git hosting providers. I think GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket all have this. With Azure, you can, use some sort of, I think, branch policies that mimic the behavior. And the code owners features are great, but they can be a little bit inflexible. There are some ways we can enhance that particular behavior in the case of GitHub and maybe other ones as well. Because they are kind of limited to this file folder or file type assignment, right? And they are sort of specified with the repo. Some teams typically experience pain with, the idea of overlapping ownership, right? If you have large files that are typically managed by multiple teams or multiple individuals on your team, sometimes if you're using the code owners thing and you're detecting that file change, you can get 2 or 3 people assigned to the review who may or may not really be the expert in the particular area of that file you want. Some teams work with different branching environments, and maybe you have different people reviewing on a dev branch versus on a production branch. There's quite a few different scenarios that could come up where the typical code ownership features available in GitHub, for example, might not be enough. And of course, the Lord of the Rings meme, one does not simply, not a bad job. Viggo Mortensen likeness, I'll give it like a B, not too bad. So what can you do about code ownership? This challenge with code ownership. Well, with automations, and you might even be able to get some of these, like I said, with GitHub Actions or with other, scripting tools or custom solutions you have. But with code ownership, you could assign a reviewer to any PR based on like the actual code changes or the file changes, not just language type files or folders. It can be more granular in that it allows for conditional logic. So some examples of what I mean by this, I mentioned it is limited to repo, folders, file types, that type of thing for the standard code ownership features. In this particular example, we can detect the actual code change itself and have some wildcard matching involved, right? If there's somebody on your team who's the payment expert, right? If it touches this payment function, we can go ahead and assign a particular person based on that match of the change set. We can even look at the labels on the PR, and a lot of teams, if you have this built-in workflow where you're touching the payment code, even though you may not be touching a specific function, those labels can be applied. And then you can go ahead and have particular reviewers assigned to senior dev. We can surface the visibility of that change with adding different labels. And you can even run tests to, sort of increase the stability that you might have. So you can run these tests separately from the standard tests or checks that might run by triggering them based on these types of detections. So super helpful. You can see there's also some conditional logic available. You can match things with any, or all. And there's a lot of flexibility when making decisions about who to assign the PR, not just based off of your standard set of files, folders, or language type. So the next challenge that can come up is complexity. Obviously, this is pretty straightforward, right? If your PR is really big or really complex, it's going to add time to review that PR. The more code to review, the more time needed to review it. You often wind up bringing in like additional reviewers because it's so big, it might touch areas of the code where that expertise, as we mentioned before, is not particularly encapsulated with one person. You definitely need more time to understand the changes, right? As a reviewer, you're coming in and you're looking at 10, 20 files being changed, and it takes a while to sort of ramp up into what's happening, especially if the description's not clear cut or there's not an attached Jira issue. It takes more review cycles, which extends that time, right? And that's sort of that dependency game of whack-a-mole, where you might come in and see this crazy long PR review, maybe leave some feedback. The feedback's addressed. Oh, and now that feedback's addressed, hey, guess what? There's another review cycle. I have to make sure everything works. And, it kind of goes on and snowballs into that sort of effect. And then there's increased risk, obviously, of downstream, of unforeseen downstream effects with larger code-based changes like that. And then lastly, but pretty important still, there's this idea of review fatigue. Somebody who comes in to review a PR, sees it's 10,000 lines or whatever it is, has an hour or two, looks at it, leaves some feedback, and then, they're tired or they go out for the day. And that leaves just a big opportunity for them to forget about that change or get distracted with something else, a priority that comes up, a different review or another ask from someone else on the team. So these are all things that can sort of affect that. This particular, the 2-button meme, impossible choice, not really a good job with the text. I'm not really sure what it was trying to do. Request changes and approve and hope for the best. Not bad. Maybe a C+. I don't know, just for the fact that it didn't really print that language right. But what can we do for PR size and complexity challenges? Well, we can trigger PRs, trigger automations that get posted when the PR itself change set goes beyond sort of an acceptable threshold, right? One thing to do is like increase that visibility. You can flag the PR with a label. If that PR, lines of code is greater than a certain value, you can see some of the examples that, we're planning to have here are measuring in terms of lines of code, number of files, number of comments, possibly even number of commits. These are all sort of indicators that, this pull request might be more complicated than other ones, okay? Teams can customize this. And even in the sense of, this type of automation rule, it applies not only to a specific repository, this might be a global one. So you can see maybe it's helpful to create this automation with sort of a wildcard repo selection. Like every repo in the org, this is one of those standard ones. Doesn't matter what team you're on, what project you're working on. We want to track that, type of monitoring for any repo that might have a change coming through. So it can be really useful in that regard, kind of going beyond that individual repo tracking for the code owner's file from GitHub. And as you can see, we can do some of those same actions, right? We can post a comment to the PR that just kind of lets the author know, they're making changes to a particular sensitive area. Or that their changes are, exceeding what, the team has accepted as a threshold. And it can all be very useful to, have that kind of workflow involved to protect against that complexity and identify some of these things sooner. Okay, next challenge. Wow, okay, that's kind of creepy. This is just Willy Wonka meme, which is interesting. It's ugly and weird, like a clown Willy Wonka. But what it's telling us is that, teams work hard to, they go through growing pains, they have best practices. It happens, right? Things get forgotten. new team members come on board, they don't have that context or that tribal knowledge. So we're always working hard to, find ways to, not make the same mistakes twice. And automations can help with that, right? It can be painful when something's missed in terms of what the PR is, forgetting to run the linter, forgot to add something in the description, there's lack of test coverage, or I didn't attach the Jira ticket. These are all problems that teams face. And with PR automations, you can pretty easily just have this passive mechanism to post checklists, right? Checklists are super helpful. I think some of our teams use this. They have checklists to make sure that the devs, or at least are reminded of some of these practices, some of these things that, they've figured out from a while ago. So really, it's super helpful. You can check for coding guidelines and link to different Confluence docs or, APIs that reflect what, best practices the team has figured out. It's sort of a self-acknowledgement. I've done X, Y, and Z to go ahead and make, this particular PR as high quality as I can and avoid some of the previous mistakes our team has made. And we can even go as far as reminding them to attach the Jira issue. So these checklists, they're native to GitHub. They're fully supporting the Markdown that GitHub supports. And they can even be tied into, the checks for the pull requests so that it won't get merged until somebody takes a proactive action and comes in here. Really useful too, sort of conditionally, if you kind of look, maybe we can check for missing descriptions, or if the reviewer is not assigned, we go ahead and we post these types of things or post comments to the author to remind them to go ahead and do that. Next challenge, surprise dog tells us, the higher impact code changes can have unforeseen downstream effects, right? Not all code changes are created equal. There's a higher degree of scrutiny for some areas of the code base versus others. This relates a lot to complexity. And there are more sensitive areas of your applications that can have downstream effects, not only for the app, but for the business, right? If payment fails or trial sign up fails or that kind of thing, we don't want those things to happen. So surprise dog meme, not too bad. I'll give that a B+. I like that one. Not as creepy as the last one. So what can you do to avoid higher impact code changes, or sorry, not avoid them, but to mitigate them and manage them? Well, we can flag them, right, for the team, help surface that visibility in a way that, just calls better attention to it. So, in this particular example, right, authentication typically tends to be a super important, area of the code base. We can do some of that standard file path detection or file name detection. In this case, is it updating the auth area, or, is it also updating the dependency, because dependencies updates can cause a lot of issues, both in terms of the functionality of the app, but also just the build or the testing suite, that kind of thing. So we'd love to be able to have some mechanisms in place to mitigate against these higher impact code changes, and obviously posting comments, adding labels about the sensitivity of the change and giving the right people, and as I mentioned before, running advanced testing against changes that affect a certain area. So you might not want to run the authentication tests for every change that a PR has, but only on the ones that show up with auth, or at least a more granular advanced testing suite for authentication beyond what might be a traditional smoke test on your app. So super helpful in that regard. And then of course, grumpy cat, can't not have that. Not too bad. It's kind of cartoonish, but I like this one. I give it an A-. Another challenge that comes up is ignored pull requests, right? And ignored pull requests, there's good reasons sometimes for this, right? Everybody has different priorities. We're all working on the most important thing that's given to us. And so not only is it more just a matter of availability, being hard to find for everybody in your team, the workload can be too high in order for somebody to just, have time to get to it. There could be poor timing with vacation or someone being sick. Distributed teams have challenges with time zones. And even just legitimate, development practices, right? Like this PR should not get merged until this other PR is merged, so you might not even want to review it until the other PR is merged. So there's a good reason to just hold off on the review or hold off on anything. And that PR could sit in the queue for a while. Additionally, sometimes, you can come in too soon to a PR, right? A lot of times some devs come in, they look at the pull request and the check, they got a notification, they click on it. Oh, the checks haven't passed. I got to come back later, right? Or like it's missing some of those things we talked about before, like an attached Jira ticket. So I don't have the context, I'm gonna have to leave a comment and get that. Well, that can save your reviewers time, right? If they don't have to go through that tedious process of identifying the parts that are missing and you have an automation in place, that can be super helpful to kind of set the PR up for success without having to pull the reviewer in too soon. What can you do about some of the delayed reviews or ignored reviews or stale PRs? Well, you can automatically flag them for lack of inactivity, right? If a pull request, for example, in this case, hasn't been updated in more than 2 days, it could be really useful to post a comment that mentions the author, allows them to, at least be made aware, hey, there's something going on, pay attention to this. We could automatically assign this PR instead of being assigned to a person, reassign it to the team, and kind of go through that same team assignment workflow that you already have set up with GitHub. It can be super helpful to just, like I said, avoid that pain of having reviewers come in too soon or having authors wait too long in order to get the review done that they want to get done. And in summary, the automations that can help your pull request workflow are going to do a few different things that we talked about. They're going to improve your sort of flexibility and control over the current code ownership feature and rules you have for your team. They can help your team encourage smaller, less complex PRs when possible and reduce the risk of those complicated PRs that sometimes have to happen when necessary. And also remind your team of the sort of best practices, improve the visibility of the changes that could impact stability or user experience or business value in PRs that have that touch on those sensitive areas. And then they can also help keep your stale pull requests from being forgotten about, or help your reviewers save time by not coming in too soon and context switching, getting that. So this is really quick, really bite-sized, really easy way to leverage automations. Again, I mentioned GitHub Actions, and there might be some other available features and other providers that help you do this to get some baseline abilities of these. But we're excited about what we have planned for GitKraken automations, and you can at least see what's in store or sign up for early access at gitkraken.dev/automations, where we're looking forward to a lot of this functionality and a lot of these features for our own team's benefit, not only our customers. It's as you kind of probably extrapolated, it's like a Zapier or an if this then that automation workflow for your pull requests. It should be available in preview very soon. And we have lots of really, really good plans for this, to kind of extend beyond that basic capability that we see, where you can set up multi-repo automation. It'll tie in very, very closely to the provider rules for code ownership and assignment, and it allow you some increased flexibility with conditional, all or omission type of triggers for your pull requests. And with that, again, my name is Jeff Schinella. Hit me up on LinkedIn if you have ideas or ways your team's using automations that you'd like to see or that you think are missing. I'd love to hear about that. Appreciate your time and have a great day. Thanks.